I'm Jessie Kreider, and I spoke at the January 16th City Council regarding acts of hate towards Mark Steinworth from the animal shelter field staff. A week later, I was put on admin leave and fired by Veronica Fincher and Chris Paxton. Of course, they came up with other reasons why I was fired, but I think we all get the picture. I heard that Ed Watson was also fired for allegedly being the person who obtained the sign. What I don't get is that two people who had no participation in shooting up the sign, assuming Ed did not take part, were fired, and everyone else who did participate were allowed to keep their jobs, and one of them will likely be promoted to my full-time position, specifically Heather Thomas, who intended to take the sign home and shoot it up with her new shotgun, because she told me she hated Mark that much. Although I believe she had never met him at the time, and quite possibly just hated him because he was supported by that group. The city of Rancho Cucamonga is sending a clear message to the public, volunteers, and also its employees. And that message is, do not speak out against inappropriate acts. Do not say anything when you clearly see mistreatment of animals. Do not make completely legitimate complaints, or the city of Rancho Cucamonga will fire or dismiss you. Don't be fooled when Chris Paxton says he's launched an investigation. They launched an investigation when I said Heather Thomas and Cinda Henry were trying to get me fired so they can have my full-time position. I told them I had heard this from several employees. Even at my request, the investigator did not speak to any of the employees I asked her to speak to. Instead, she just spoke to the ones I made the claims against, who of course denied it. From my experience, the investigations Chris Paxton conducts are one-sided, and the investigator sides with the city. But why wouldn't they? That's what the city's paying them to do, just that. They thought that if they fired me, I would just go away. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case. I have an appeal hearing coming in 2 weeks, and I'm going to continue to fight for my job. Council, please see how bad this is, how bad this looks, and convince them to reverse their decision to fire me. If Heather Thomas or Cinda Henry gets my full-time position, it will further validate what I have been claiming all along. These girls set out to get me fired, just like I told the investigator.
Jesse, you're going to need to wrap up.
I can almost guarantee you that
Jesse
will not be I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. If I'm going to give you more than 3 minutes, that means there is no time.
I got all my...
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
I am the wife of Jessie Kreider, the shelter employee that spoke out in January and was fired shortly thereafter. I'm also a current volunteer at the shelter and have been since 2007. Jessie was a Navy veteran and had been an employee at the shelter for over 5.5 years with very little issues until Veronica Fincher started. Every review he received up until May 2012 had been meets or exceeds expectations, including the first review with his supervisor, Linda Weiserick. It was 6 months into Veronica's employment that Jessie received his first bad review. The director will tell you that Jessie was fired for reasons other than being a whistleblower or for wanting to give his full-time position to one of the women in the office. But almost everything that was listed in his termination letter has been done by the part-timers. Heather Thomas and Cinda Henry, at least one of which used a tranquilizer gun to illegally shoot up Mark Steinworth's sign on city property. I wonder if Heather was reprimanded for that, or if her supervisor, Linda, was for that matter, since she took part as well. Or will Heather be rewarded for doing so by being promoted to Jessie's full-time position, which she and Cinda have been working so hard to get? This is a well-known fact throughout the shelter. Although, as Jessie mentioned, they launched an investigation into these claims and they determined they were unfounded. It's funny that the investigator couldn't uncover the truth, but I myself was able to get this information from several employees without even having to ask. In fact, one of these employees approached Jessie and said they would like to tell them things that have been said about him by Heather and Cinda. We actually have a video interview from a shelter employee detailing their plans to get him fired. Council, I ask you, will you be rewarding Heather Thomas with a promotion to Jessie's full-time position after what she did? Is this who you want representing your animal shelter? Someone who expresses hatred for someone they don't even know and shows no respect? The point in Jessie talking about the sign was to show council they can do whatever they want at the shelter without fear of repercussions because they are protected by Veronica Fincher, Linda Weiserek, John Gilbertson, and Chris Paxton. The point is that they did not just violate the employee handbook in doing this. It violated Rancho Cucamonga Code of Ordinances number 9.04.010, and the wrong person was punished for it. Jessie has an appeal coming up in 2 weeks. I asked you to discuss this matter with Chris Paxton and Veronica Fincher. Ask why an employee was fired for pointing out something that was inappropriate and what was done regarding the employees that were actually involved in the act. Jessie was fired because Linda made a promise to these women she would do whatever it takes to get them full-time positions. I guess by that she meant getting an employee fired. One last thing I want to mention. It does not look good that with Jessie's firing, it leaves only one full-time man and a few part-timers working at the shelter, which is currently run by 85 to 90% women. If this isn't discrimination, I don't know what is. Thank you.
On January 12, 2013, the Freedom Court was dedicated to honor American service members. On January 16th, Navy veteran of the Iraq War and Animal Services officer Jessie Kreider bravely stood before council to expose the bullying, lies, and corruption which was taking place at the animal shelter. His appropriate chain of command ideally should have been 1. Go to his supervisor, Linda Weiserek, but he knew she was partaking in inappropriate behavior. 2. Go to Veronica Fincher, director and Linda's boss. That wasn't going to do any good, as the problem started once Veronica Fincher became director. 3. Go to Chris Paxton, human resource director. He was at the shelter November 11th, 2012, to fire us volunteers. The Mark Steinnorth sign was clearly visible, yet he allowed it to stay, though the City Employee Handbook Section 13 clearly states no political activity in the workplace. 4. Go to John Gilbertson, first-year city manager, who hired Veronica and was supporting her in the mistreatment and increased killings of the animals and firings of the volunteers trying to save them. He could not do any of them, so he came to council, and so far you have done nothing. It was no coincidence that when we were fired, the first weekend after the election, the shot-up sign was placed so we could see it as we were walking down the hall to Veronica's office, showing us this is what you get for supporting Mark Steinnorth. How is your shelter thriving when they have killed almost 40% of the animal population? Foster caregivers and fundraisers never worked with the hostility we have. They have never been resented or chased out for staying late to give dogs blankets and water or hose down their feces-filled kennels. Between 2009 and 2012, the city paid Ray Patchett and Associates $36,000 to work with the volunteers and staff to try to bridge the hostility. And we got fired. So, the next question is, will council do anything to help? We're still willing to go back and help those animals. They were thriving under our care. We want to pay it forward at the shelter. We don't want recognition. We want to help the animals. We're still willing to try to work with Veronica, despite everything she's done.
I'm Dana Keithley. I was one of the dismissed volunteers last year, November 2012. I was speaking tonight to lend my support to Mr. Jessie Kreider. In the 5 years that I was there as a volunteer, I always knew him to be very professional, very kind to the volunteers as well as to the animals. He would always say hello, always acknowledge volunteers and other staff members that were in there. On November 11th, when Susan Keithley was talking about being dismissed, I was brought into Veronica Fincher's office to be given a warning. I too saw the Mark Steinnorth sign. I saw it 2 days later on that Tuesday, November 13th. It was still there in the office. I have photos of these as well. The sign was not removed until Mr. Steinnorth came in to visit the shelter on November 15th. So again, this sign was in clear view of not only staff members, city officials, but also other employees as well as volunteers. And something else that I wanted to show, and again, this is not to to throw anybody under the bus or, to try to get other people in trouble, but just to show what was going on at the shelter. This was a Facebook posting or a private messaging that was occurring on May 23rd, 2012 between Sherry Rennie. She was a former volunteer. She's now currently a staff member at the Animal Center, talking about what was going on. And this is just a few weeks before we came to speak to you last year in June 2012, begging for your help. John Gilbertson told me that during the hiring process that the new director would have a no-kill goaler mindset. I'm not seeing that. The politicians don't care about the emotion. They just care about numbers, and right now the numbers very well might qualify for no-kill in the technical sense of the term. Ms. Rennie goes on to say again, given what can be claimed for adoptable versus unadoptable animals, and she says, yes, that can all be reported. On the surface, there are no problems. It isn't until you're on the inside that you start to see it. And again, she says, if we get fired, then the dogs suffer. I don't want that to happen. If we try and fail, then even more dogs die because we won't be there to do playgroups and socialize them and take them to offsites, etc. This is exactly what happened. We spoke out. And the few volunteers that did, we were dismissed for doing so. Section 1983 allows us to be able to speak out and exercise our First Amendment rights in speaking out against conditions in animal shelters. There can be no dispute that complaining about abuse or violation of law at shelters is a constitutionally protected right. We have the First Amendment right to speak out against abuses, violations of law committed by a governmental entity, and we have the constitutionally protected right to demand that the government correct the wrongs that are identified. This includes the right to threaten to sue or to actually file suit against the shelter. This is not what we want to do. We've been trying to work with you for almost a year now, and again, we're still willing to do so.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Melissa Schweigert, and I want to let you know how frustrated I am with the city's new volunteer process. On March 23rd of this year, I attended the animal shelter's volunteer orientation because I'm interested in becoming a dog walker for the shelter. This was the first orientation offered in 6 months. At this meeting, I was informed that the city has a new policy requiring volunteers to be interviewed and fingerprinted before they are accepted. Although I do feel it is important to note that this policy does not apply to large events, such as the Wellness and Health Fair happening May 11th. Now, in my opinion, this does not make any sense. I do not understand why, if I'm volunteering in a large gathering, fingerprints and a background check aren't necessary, yet they are for me to take a lonely dog on a walk. That confusion aside, assuming I am approved after my required interview, I will attend a class to become a dog walker for the shelter. Barbara Hansen, the volunteer coordinator, then went on to mention that the shelter will be looking at our availability and creating a dog walking schedule for us. When I heard this, I couldn't believe it. A schedule? Isn't a schedule for actual work? As an elementary teacher, my free time varies throughout the year depending on the needs of my students, and I don't want to be tied down to a schedule. It was my hope that as a volunteer, I could come into the shelter when I had time and walk a few poor dogs that had been sitting in their runs with minimal interaction due to the lack of current dog walking volunteers. As of today, almost a month has passed since orientation. Having not heard anything about my volunteer status, I decided to email Ms. Hansen this past Monday. Ms. Hansen did email me back, explaining that the shelter has been very busy and that interviews should begin within 3 weeks, although she could not provide me with a concrete timeline. Now, I understand they are busy at the shelter, but aren't we all? I am busy, yet I took the time to come here and speak to you tonight. By the time I'm actually approved to walk the dogs, 2 to 3 months will have passed. 2 to 3 months to simply walk dogs. A few weeks ago, I watched the City Council meeting online, and I listened as Veronica Fincher and other shelter employees spoke about the necessity and importance of volunteers. I heard the same thing from Ms. Hansen at the orientation that I attended. Yet, actions speak louder than words, and I am led to believe that while the shelter states volunteers are important, they do not want them in their shelter, which is why they've been dragging the volunteer process out. I do wonder if speaking at tonight's meeting will eliminate me from becoming a volunteer with the shelter. I hope not. Ultimately, though, if the shelter decides not to approve me to volunteer, their decision will not hurt me as much as the many wonderful dogs I could find time to walk and who deserve to be walked daily.
My name is Victoria Royce, and I have been a volunteer at the Rancho Cucamonga Animal Shelter since March 2009. During my time at the animal shelter, I have fostered over 70 kittens and many adult dogs, sometimes having more than 1 litter of bottle-fed kittens and foster dogs at the same time. I was even given the Foster Parent of the Year award at the beginning of last year. When most people hear that volunteers have been fired, they are understandably shocked. They must figure they were harming animals or getting violent with staff members and other volunteers. That, however, is very far from the case. I would like to read some of the so-called crimes that the volunteers of that group have committed and the reasons given in writing why they were fired. They had an inactive volunteer come in and take pictures of the animals for networking. Volunteers are inactive in the computer after not logging in for 3 months, and all it takes is a phone call to become active again. This photographer was not wearing the proper volunteer t-shirt. She was wearing her Euphoria work shirt, who is a partner of the shelter. Volunteers and others appeared at a city council meeting and presented a statement concerning the problems with the current management in the center and contributions made by volunteers. On a meet and greet with a dog named Buddy, who was scheduled to be destroyed the next day, a volunteer made positive remarks about Buddy, who they had spent countless hours with in play groups and free from his cage whenever the staff member made untrue negative remarks to the adopter. This same staff member told the adopter the dog was dangerous and should not go to home with other dogs, especially not little ones, and pretty much tried to scare her away. Luckily, she was not successful. Here's a picture of Buddy with his new family, including 2 5-pound chihuahuas. A volunteer who was the best friend's pit bull grant coordinator contacted Euphoria to set up the obedience classes that were previously paid for by the grant but had to be put on hold due to weather and no lights on the field. They were told by the director they were animal advocates. On November 6th, while running playgroups, a volunteer wore a best friend's t-shirt she received while being the grant coordinator for the shelter. The director overheard 2 volunteers speaking to each other about their belief that the staff intentionally hid certain dogs from volunteers so that the volunteers would forget about the animals and therefore not be able to oppose their euthanization. This was after finding out a dog named Diamond was pulled off the floor and sat in the back kennel for weeks, maybe months, hidden from public view and then killed with no warning. The biggest crime of the volunteers in the shelter's eyes appears to be talking about the shelter on their personal Facebook pages. When a dog would be killed, many times they would post a rest in peace comment on their personal Facebook pages. When things were going on at the shelter and abuses were being witnessed, volunteers would reach out to each other on Facebook. Never once were items posted on a staff member's page, and to see comments, most of the times you had to be looking for them. Veronica Fincher has been heard encouraging staff to pull up certain members of that group's Facebook pages during business hours, even after they were fired. Another current volunteer posted on her page after the volunteers were fired that she felt bad for the shelter dogs and it was ridiculous to fire volunteers. Veronica cornered her the next time she was at the shelter and talked to her about it and said that if she did not start supporting her in the shelter, she was going to have to go.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. Mr. Markham, it's good to see you back.
Thank you, Jim.
My name is Jim Moffett. I've been a resident since 1972. In the last almost a year, every time there's a council meeting, this animal shelter comes up, and nothing seems to be getting done. I don't think you people are ostriches and put your head in the sand and think it's going to go away. As you can see by the people here tonight, they are concerned. And where there's something, as many people get together and voice their concerns, there could be a problem. We have an animal shelter there. We've had volunteers 5 and 6 years to get fired. It's ludicrous. How could anybody all of a sudden do something wrong after that many years with their love for the animals, and they volunteer of their time and nothing seems to be happening? I think it is time, Mr. Mayor and Mr. City Manager, to stand up and resolve this problem for the good of the city and the animals, and not only the people who were dismissed. This is ridiculous.
My name is Andra Gilbertson. I have been a volunteer at the Rancho shelter for about 4.5 years. Let's see, a couple months ago, we had a Great Dane at the shelter, and I had never seen a Great Dane in all the years I have been volunteering. I have had Great Danes, and they are truly gentle giants, and Dane, as he was called, was no exception. I was confident he would soon find a good home, and so when I came in shortly thereafter and he was gone, I was elated that he had gotten out of there. Well, he didn't. He was put down for temperament reasons. I am respectfully requesting the City Council to appoint a professional committee to set and maintain the highest standards for temperament testing, including but not limited to, foremost, the qualifications of the testers who are doing this temperament testing. This is to be on videotape, and the test is to be reviewed by this professional committee prior to any action taken to this dog. Another item is, where are the dogs? We are in the height of the kitty and puppy season, and the ports are empty, the halls are empty, and there's one dog per kennel. This time of the year, there should be 200 plus dogs. Today at 5 o'clock, there are 125. What is happening to our dogs? Volunteers, with the new procedures, it is going to take a month to get new volunteers in. I have been up here speaking every other week, begging for volunteers for the dogs. The 4 volunteers that were fired were dedicated walkers for our large dogs. Since they have been gone, these dogs, many of them don't even get out of their small kennels for 3 weeks. This obviously is extremely difficult on the dogs, and they are going crazy. And we know what happens to the dogs when this happens. I would like to say a word about a Jessie, who was up here earlier, who was fired from the Field Services Department. When he went out in the van, I was always confident that the animals he went out to help would get a fair shake. He's a very compassionate man, so he had to go. Please get the facts on his firing. It is reverse discrimination. Thank you.
My name's Stacy Homes. I'm a resident of Rancho Cucamonga for 30 years, a homeowner in the city. And I want to share an experience I had. I'm not a part of the organization that's here about the animal shelter today. I'm just one of the public who went in on Monday to adopt a dog, actually. Didn't have a very satisfying experience. I was greeted when I came in. I went into the kennel area to look for what I was looking for and found a possible dog and went back up to the front desk. I inquired about what the process was. They told me I needed to fill out a card, a prospect card, to do a meet and greet. I did that. It had a bunch of questions on it that I was kind of surprised to see. How many members were in my family and that type of thing, which I guess they need to screen carefully, but I was a little bit shocked about the details. Nonetheless, I filled it out. While I was waiting, there was a lady that was in with a family. She was a shelter representative, and she was talking to them about a possible cat adoption. And I could overhear their conversation while waiting for the dog to be brought up. And I was shocked because she actually had discouraged the family from adopting this cat. It was a gentleman and his daughter, and there was some debate going on about how the cat was to be cared for and so forth. And she basically told him, you know, this might not be the place for you to get the cat. Go home and think about it. There's other places that you can go. I was really shocked. Anyway, I went on, visited with the dog. I had my girls with me. We went into the meet and greet area, and the volunteer was with us. She was a nice person and all, but she basically drilled me on my family. She informed me that all of my animals, every member of my family, needed to come down and meet this dog before I'd be approved for adoption, including my senior dog I have at home. I'm a responsible dog owner. I have 2 dogs that are licensed in the city. I had to bring them all down here to be approved to adopt a dog. I think I'm a pretty good judge of whether or not the dog's going to work into my family. The dog had signs of kennel cough. I'm not going to bring my 11-year-old dog down there and expose him and not even know if that dog's going to come into my home. So I was really disappointed. I left there. Yesterday I went down to Riverside. What a completely different experience. That will be where I will be going to adopt dogs, unfortunately. I'm a taxpayer in this city, but it was a completely different experience. Clean. The volunteers were so helpful. They knew the animals. They filled me in on their personalities and characteristics. I found a wonderful dog there. It was a simple process. I didn't feel like I was interrogated, which is how I felt when I walked out of our shelter. I felt good about rescuing an animal who's going to be coming home to me tomorrow. So it was just a very disheartening experience for me. In addition, I did have a concern. My daughter wanted to go in and see the cats while we were there. She's a cat lover. There wasn't a lot of cats in there. I didn't see a lot of kitties around. Lots and lots of empty cages. I don't know what the reason for that is, but I do want to mention it since I did hear it earlier. So after hearing all these comments and so forth, I just urge the City Council, we really need to look into what's going on in the shelter because the public is not pleased there.
My name is Kelly. I live in Rancho Cucamonga. I really can't even believe I'm here right now. I don't know whether to cry or to go and scream in your faces because we need to do something about the animal shelter. We worked really hard back in 2004, 2005, Bill, Nicole, lots of other people to get our shelter to a no-kill. what's going on. I want to thank Jessie. I don't know you.
Kelly, would you address us? Thank you.
I will.
Thank you.
I want to thank Jessie. He is being discriminated against, but the reason he was fired, I believe, is because he told what was going on. He's helping the animals. He's trying to protect them. He's letting us know what's going on down there. We need people like that there. I want to thank the volunteers who were fired. I'm sorry to hear that are down here to try to protect the animals, try to be the voice for the animals. They're all very courageous and brave. It's brave and courageous to come up and tell what's going on, because your job could be in jeopardy. And that's what Jessie did. He's courageous and he's brave. I think Veronica, I don't know too much about her, but from what I've heard, we maybe need to let her go, find somebody else. Bring back Nathan Winograd. Have an independent committee come in to investigate what's going on down there. What's going on with our fundraising money? My tax dollars goes to that shelter. Your tax dollars go to the shelter. I don't want these animals being put down. That's not what my money's for. It's for to help adopt them out. What's happened to all of our programs? Fostering. How many volunteers are there? We've lost a lot. It saddens me to hear this is going on again. We need to see some euthanasia reports. Maybe some of you need to go down there and witness it, see how you feel. You all maybe have animals. Bill, I know you have animals. I have animals. Just because someone doesn't own them right now doesn't mean that they don't want to be loved. They're all of our animals. Just because it's not yours down there doesn't mean they're not important, because they are important. I just think we need to see some euthanasia reports, and I think we need to have an independent committee go down and investigate what's going on. It really does sadden me, because we worked very hard to change the city over. I don't know what's going on, but I do want to thank Jessie. I know that was not easy to do, and I want to thank all the volunteers that are trying the hardest they can to save these animals. They need a voice. You are their voice, and you need to step up.
Good evening, Council. I'm Nicole Meyerchin, and like Kelly, it saddens me immensely to have to be back here again. We spent years dealing with a similar situation under the county, and I think of the thousands of animals that needlessly died as you were trying to figure out what was really going on. You know, several of you have a fire background, and often where there's smoke, there's fire. And in this case, it's not that you have one disgruntled volunteer, not two, but what I'm hearing tonight, it makes me sick. You know, and the fact that this hasn't been addressed and corrected already, I mean, I can't even believe the level of unprofessionalism I'm hearing regarding your sign in the shelter. I'm thinking, no other place in the city would that be tolerated. I work in the city, and the professionalism in the areas that I deal with, that would never be tolerated. You know, we're listening and hearing about all these volunteers being let go. Would that be happening under Michelle Pereira in the library services? Of course not. Why is it only happening here in the animal services? I wonder. Could it be because there is an issue? And when there's an issue, I mean, when people are volunteering their time and it's free, a free service, they're going to be elated if those animals are being treated right. If those animals are getting adopted, they're not going to be here complaining about it. People take time out of their day to come here and complain about things because they're seeing things that shouldn't be going on. And we're here as taxpayers, as constituents, as voters, and we're asking you to address this and to fix this. You know, I certainly don't want to have to go through another 5 years of being here every single council meeting. And I am so grateful for the time that these people took out of their day to stand up for the animals and come and voice their concerns to you. But it's your job to address it and make sure that it gets handled. And I understand that you need to come across and you need to be impartial and you need to get the facts from both sides. But when you're getting so much coming in, just like in the past, you have to look at that and go, what's really going on here? And, you know, I agree with Kelly 100%. We should be talking to Nathan Winograd. I think one of the problems here is that we hired him, we paid him, for his services, but we never adopted that this is our city standard. So what happens is we get shelter director X who comes in and does it however they want. We get shelter director Y who comes in, they do it however they want, but we don't have a standard to be able to hold them to and say this is the city standard and this is how we expect our shelter to be run, and this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. And then we can hold people accountable. So I would like to see you adopt Nathan Winograd's policies and procedures and say that this is our city standard, and that way a shelter director will know what is expected of them, and that way we can applaud them when it's right, steer them in the direction when they're going, askew, and if they got it completely wrong, terminate them.